Sarah Martinez looked at the clock on the coffee shop wall. It was almost 9 in the evening, and her shift was finally ending. She had been working since early morning, and her feet hurt from standing all day. The small coffee shop had been busy with customers wanting their evening drinks before heading home from work. She untied her brown apron and hung it on the hook behind the counter. Her manager, Tom, waved goodbye as she grabbed her purse and car keys from the back room. Sarah was tired but happy because tomorrow was her day off. She planned to sleep in and maybe watch some movies at home. The parking lot was almost empty now. Only a few cars remained under the dim streetlights. Sarah walked to her small blue Honda Civic and got inside. The car was old, but it ran well and got her where she needed to go. She started the engine and pulled out of the parking space slowly. The drive home usually took about 15 minutes through the quiet streets of her neighborhood. Sarah turned on the radio and hummed along to a soft song that was playing. She stopped at the first red light and checked her phone quickly. No messages waiting for her. She put the phone back in her purse and waited for the light to turn green. As Sarah drove through the intersection on Maple Street, she noticed how empty the roads were tonight. Most people were probably home having dinner with their families or watching television. She liked the peaceful feeling of driving when traffic was light. It gave her time to think about her day and plan for tomorrow. The next intersection had a 4-way stop sign. Sarah slowed down and looked both ways before proceeding. Everything seemed normal and quiet. She was only about 5 minutes away from her apartment building now. She was already thinking about taking a hot shower and making some tea before bed. But as Sarah approached the intersection of Maple and Oak Street, something terrible was about to happen. She had no way of knowing that a large delivery truck was speeding toward the same intersection from her right side. The truck driver had been working long hours and was rushing to make his final delivery of the day. The traffic light was green for Sarah as she entered the intersection. She was driving at the speed limit and doing everything right, but the truck driver had not seen that his light was red. He was looking down at his delivery papers instead of watching the road ahead of him. Sarah saw the massive truck at the last second. It was a huge white delivery truck much larger than her small car. The truck was moving fast and showed no signs of slowing down. For just a moment, Sarah felt frozen with fear as she realized what was about to happen. She tried to turn her steering wheel hard to the left to avoid the collision, but there was not enough time. The front of the delivery truck slammed into the passenger side of her Honda Civic with tremendous force. The impact was so powerful that it lifted her car completely off the ground. Sarah felt her small car spinning through the air. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as metal crashed against metal, and glass exploded all around her. The sound was deafening, like thunder crashing right next to her ears. Her seatbelt held her in place, but she could feel her body being thrown from side to side inside the car. Her car flipped over once before landing hard on its roof in the middle of the intersection. Steam and smoke began rising from the crushed engine. Sarah found herself hanging upside down, held only by her seatbelt. Blood was dripping from her forehead where a piece of broken glass had cut her. Pain shot through her chest and ribs with every breath she tried to take. Something was definitely broken inside her body. Her left arm felt numb and she could not move it properly. But strangely, Sarah felt more aware than frightened. Her mind seemed to be working clearly despite the terrible accident. She could hear people shouting outside the car and someone was calling for help. Car doors were slamming as people stopped to see what had happened. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice was weak and she was not sure anyone could hear her inside the crushed car. Within minutes, she heard the sound of sirens getting closer. First came the police cars with their flashing red and blue lights. Then she heard the deeper sound of a fire truck and the higher-pitched wail of an ambulance. Help was coming, but Sarah was not sure how badly she was hurt. As she hung there upside down waiting for rescue, strange thoughts began going through Sarah's mind. She found herself thinking about her injuries in a very technical way. The cut on her head was bleeding heavily, but head wounds always bled more than they were dangerous. Her ribs were probably cracked from the impact, but her breathing was still working. Sarah had never studied medicine or first aid, but somehow she seemed to know these things about her own injuries. It was like having knowledge that came from somewhere deep inside her mind that she could not explain. She felt worried about possible internal bleeding from the side impact, but was not sure why she would think about such medical terms. The paramedics arrived and began working to get her out of the car safely. Sarah could hear them talking about her condition and planning how to move her without causing more injury. Everything they said made perfect sense to her, even though she had never heard such medical language before today. One of the paramedics managed to reach through the broken window and check her pulse. He asked her name and if she could tell him what day it was. Sarah answered his questions clearly, which seemed to surprise him given how badly damaged her car was as they carefully cut her seatbelt and prepared to move her to a stretcher. Sarah felt something strange happening in her mind. It was like pieces of a puzzle were trying to fit together, but she could not see the complete picture yet. All she knew was that this terrible accident was about to change her life in ways she could never imagine. The ambulance doors closed, and they began the race to Regional Medical Center. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to stay calm as the paramedics worked to keep her stable during the journey to the hospital. The ambulance pulled up to Regional Medical Center with its sirens blaring and lights flashing bright red and blue against the hospital walls. Sarah could feel every bump and turn as the paramedics rushed her through the automatic doors into the busy emergency room. The smell of disinfectant and the sound of medical equipment filled the air around her. Inside the emergency room, there was controlled chaos everywhere Sarah looked. Nurses in colorful scrubs moved quickly between patient rooms, while doctors checked charts and gave orders to their teams. The waiting room was full of people with various injuries and illnesses, all hoping to be seen soon by the medical staff. A triage nurse named Linda quickly looked at Sarah as the paramedics wheeled her stretcher through the entrance. Linda had been working in emergency medicine for over 10 years and could assess how serious a patient was within seconds of seeing them. She looked at Sarah's bleeding head wound and listened to the paramedics' report about the car accident. Sarah was marked as urgent and taken directly to Trauma Bay 3. This was one of the rooms reserved for the most serious cases that came into the emergency department. The room was filled with monitors beeping and medical equipment that could help save lives during the most critical situations. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was the attending physician on duty that night. She had just finished treating a patient with a heart attack when Sarah arrived in her trauma bay. Dr. Walsh was known throughout the hospital for her calm demeanor under pressure and her excellent skills in emergency medicine. 2 nurses immediately began working on Sarah, while Dr. Walsh started her examination. They attached monitoring wires to track her heart rate and blood pressure. An IV line was inserted into her arm to give her fluids and pain medication if needed. Sarah watched everything happening around her with unusual focus and attention. Dr. Walsh began checking Sarah's injuries systematically, starting with her head wound. The cut was about 3 inches long and would need stitches, but it was not life-threatening. She used a small flashlight to check Sarah's eyes for signs of brain injury or concussion from the impact. As Dr. Walsh examined her ribs, Sarah could feel sharp pain with each breath she took. The doctor pressed gently on different areas of her chest and abdomen, checking for signs of internal bleeding or organ damage. Sarah found herself mentally following along with every step of the examination. Then something unexpected happened that surprised everyone in the trauma bay. Sarah began asking questions that no ordinary car accident victim should know to ask. Her voice was weak from her injuries, but her words were clear and precise, like someone with medical training. "Are you checking for internal bleeding with the FAST exam?" Sarah asked quietly. "My left side impact suggests possible splenic injury." The FAST exam was a special ultrasound test used to look for bleeding inside the abdomen after trauma. Most people had never heard of this test, let alone know when it should be used. Dr. Walsh stopped what she was doing and stared at her patient with surprise and curiosity. In all her years working in emergency medicine, she had never had a patient suggest their own diagnostic tests. Usually, people who had been in serious car accidents were either too scared to talk or too confused to think clearly. Sarah continued speaking with the same clinical precision that amazed everyone listening. "The head wound looks worse than it is," she said calmly. "It is just a scalp laceration, but you should probably get a CT scan to rule out any brain injury from the impact." Nurse Patricia, who had been working alongside Dr. Walsh, looked at her colleague with raised eyebrows. This young woman was not only staying remarkably calm under very stressful circumstances, but she was also demonstrating medical knowledge. That seemed impossible for someone who worked in a coffee shop. Dr. Walsh decided to test Sarah's knowledge further. She asked Sarah what other injuries she thought might be likely given the type of accident she had been in. Without hesitation, Sarah began listing possibilities that showed she understood trauma medicine at a very advanced level. "Possible pneumothorax from rib fractures," Sarah said, using the medical term for a collapsed lung. "Check for seatbelt sign across the abdomen, which could indicate internal organ damage. Also watch for delayed symptoms of aortic injury. since it was a high-speed side-impact collision. The entire medical team in Trauma Bay 3 had stopped what they were doing to listen to Sarah speak. Her observations were not just medically accurate, but they were delivered with the confidence and precision of someone who had extensive experience with traumatic injuries. Dr. Walsh had seen this type of calm medical knowledge before, but only in colleagues who had military experience. During her residency training, she had worked with several doctors and medics who had served in combat zones. They all had the same way of assessing injuries quickly and staying focused under pressure. Sarah seemed to realize that everyone was staring at her strangely. She looked around the trauma bay with confusion in her eyes, as if she was surprised by her own words. "I do not know why I know these things," she said honestly. "The words just seem to come out of me automatically." Dr. Walsh continued her examination, but now she was paying attention to more than just Sarah's physical injuries. She noticed how Sarah positioned herself on the stretcher to have the best view of the room entrance. She observed how Sarah's eyes tracked every movement of the medical staff with the alertness of someone trained to assess situations quickly. When a crash cart was wheeled past their room to respond to another emergency, Sarah's head turned immediately toward the sound. Her body language showed the instant alertness that Dr. Walsh recognized from her military medical colleagues. Everything about Sarah suggested someone with advanced trauma training. The CT scan results came back showing no brain injury, just as Sarah had predicted. The fast exam revealed no internal bleeding in her abdomen. Her ribs were fractured but not displaced, which meant they would heal on their own with time and rest. All of Sarah's own assessments had been completely accurate. As Dr. Walsh prepared to move Sarah to a regular hospital room for observation, she could not stop thinking about the mystery of this patient. Sarah Martinez was supposed to be just a coffee shop employee, but she had demonstrated medical knowledge that rivaled experienced trauma specialists. Dr. Walsh made a note in Sarah's chart about her unusual medical knowledge and decided to mention the case to some of her colleagues. She had a feeling that there was much more to Sarah's story than anyone yet realized. The morning sun was shining through the hospital windows when Marcus Thompson finished his overnight shift in the emergency department. He had been working at Regional Medical Center for 6 months now, picking up extra shifts whenever he could. As a Navy SEAL medic on medical leave, Marcus found that working at the hospital helped keep his skills sharp while he recovered from his own injuries. Marcus was different from most of the other medical staff at the hospital. He was tall and muscular with short military-style hair and scars on his arms that told stories of dangerous missions overseas. His medical training had been learned not in quiet classrooms but in combat zones, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Dr. Walsh found Marcus in the break room drinking coffee and writing notes in a patient chart. She had worked with him on many difficult cases and respected his unique combination of medical knowledge and military experience. Marcus brought a calm confidence to emergency situations that helped everyone work better as a team. "Marcus, I want to tell you about an interesting patient we had last night," Dr. Walsh said as she sat down across from him. She told him about Sarah Martinez and how she had displayed remarkable medical knowledge, despite supposedly having no training. The young woman had correctly predicted her own treatment needs and used medical terms that most doctors learned in advanced training. Dr. Walsh explained how Sarah had suggested the fast exam for internal bleeding and had accurately assessed her own head injury. She had known about possible complications from side impact collisions and had remained surprisingly calm throughout the entire emergency treatment. Everything about her behavior suggested someone with extensive trauma experience. "This sounds like someone with military medical training," Marcus said immediately. "I have seen this before in soldiers who have worked as combat medics. They develop an instinct for trauma medicine that becomes second nature even in stressful situations. The calmness under pressure is something we train for specifically." Marcus was curious about this mysterious patient, so he decided to visit her room before leaving the hospital. He wanted to see for himself if Sarah displayed the characteristics he recognized in other military medical personnel. Sometimes civilian doctors miss the subtle signs that indicated military background. He knocked softly on the door of room 314 and entered when he heard Sarah say, "Come in." She was sitting up in her hospital bed looking much better than her medical chart would suggest. Her head wound had been stitched neatly, and despite her bandaged ribs, she appeared alert and comfortable. What struck Marcus immediately was the way Sarah assessed him as he walked into the room. Her eyes automatically checked his hands for weapons, then looked at his uniform for any identifying information. She positioned herself to have the best view of both Marcus and the door behind him. These were automatic behaviors that Marcus recognized from his military training. "Good morning. I am Marcus Thompson, one of the medics here," Marcus said, extending his hand toward Sarah. She shook it with a firm grip that was much stronger than he expected from someone who had been in a serious car accident just 12 hours earlier. "Dr. Walsh mentioned you had some interesting insights about your own treatment last night," Marcus continued. "That is pretty unusual for someone without medical training." He watched Sarah's face carefully as he spoke, looking for any reaction that might reveal hidden knowledge or memories. Sarah's expression flickered, for just a moment showing something between confusion and recognition. It was like watching someone try to remember a word that was right on the tip of their tongue, but would not quite come to them. "I do not know why I knew those things," Sarah admitted honestly. "It was like the words just came out of me without me thinking about them. I work at a coffee shop and I have never studied medicine or anything like that." But even as she spoke, Marcus noticed details that contradicted her words. Marcus spent the next hour talking with Sarah about her accident and her recovery process. But he found himself paying more attention to her unconscious behaviors than to what she was actually saying. Every small action she took seemed to confirm his suspicion that she had military training. When Sarah ate her hospital breakfast, she did so with efficient, purposeful movements. She finished everything on her plate quickly and completely, like someone who had learned not to waste food or time during meals. Most civilian patients picked at hospital food and complained about the taste. During their conversation, a nurse accidentally dropped a metal clipboard in the hallway outside Sarah's room. The sound echoed loudly through the quiet hospital corridor. Sarah's head snapped toward the sound immediately with the kind of instant alertness that Marcus had seen in combat veterans. Her reaction was not just startled surprise like most people would show. Instead, Sarah's entire body tensed and her eyes focused intently on the doorway, as if she was preparing to respond to a potential threat. It took several seconds for her to relax again when she realized it was just a harmless accident. Marcus also noticed how Sarah positioned herself in the hospital bed. Even though she was supposed to be resting and recovering, she had arranged her pillows and blankets so she could see anyone who entered her room. She kept her water cup and call button within easy reach like someone who had been trained to always be ready for action. These behaviors were so subtle that most people would never notice them. But Marcus had been trained to observe and assess people quickly. Everything about Sarah's body language and instincts suggested someone who had received extensive tactical and medical training in high-stress environments. When Marcus asked Sarah about her background and family, she seemed genuinely confused about many details of her own life. She could remember working at the coffee shop and her daily routines. But when he asked about her childhood or education, her answers became vague and uncertain. Sarah mentioned that she sometimes had strange dreams that felt more like memories than imagination. She described flashes of images that included helicopters, the sound of gunfire, and the feeling of working frantically to save someone's life. But she could never remember enough details to make sense of these fragments. Marcus left Sarah's room that morning, convinced that she was a military veteran who had somehow lost access to her own memories. He had seen similar cases among soldiers who had experienced severe trauma or head injuries. The body remembered all the training even when the conscious mind could not access those memories. He decided to do some quiet research into Sarah's background to see if he could uncover the truth about her mysterious past. Sarah had been in the hospital for 3 days when the strange behaviors started becoming impossible to ignore. Every nurse and therapist who worked with her noticed something different about the way she moved and reacted to things around her. It was like watching someone who was pretending to be an ordinary person, but could not quite hide their real training. The physical therapy sessions were where Sarah's mysterious abilities showed most clearly. Jenny Martinez had been working as a physical therapist at Regional Medical Center for 12 years. She had helped hundreds of car accident victims recover their strength and mobility, but she had never worked with anyone like Sarah. During Sarah's first appointment, Jenny expected to work with someone who would struggle with basic movements after her injuries. Most patients needed lots of encouragement and instruction to do simple exercises correctly. Jenny always had to demonstrate each movement several times and then guide patients through the proper form. But when Sarah started her exercises, it was completely different from what Jenny expected. Sarah's body moved with precision and control that took most people months to develop. Her balance was perfect even though her ribs were still healing and should have made movement painful and awkward. Jenny asked Sarah to do some basic arm strengthening exercises. She showed Sarah how to lift small weights to test her shoulder and arm strength after the accident. Sarah nodded and picked up the weights, but then she performed the exercises with form that was better than many professional athletes Jenny had worked. With each movement Sarah made was exactly the same as the one before it. Her posture remained straight and controlled throughout every repetition. She breathed at exactly the right times during each exercise, showing breathing techniques that Jenny usually had to teach patients over many sessions. The balance testing was even more surprising. Jenny brought out an unstable platform that was designed to challenge patients who were relearning basic coordination after injuries. Most people needed to hold onto railings and took several attempts before they could stand on the platform without falling. Sarah stepped onto the wobbly platform and immediately found perfect balance. She stood completely still with her arms relaxed at her sides while the platform moved under her feet. When Jenny asked her to close her eyes and maintain balance, Sarah did so without any difficulty at all. Jenny was amazed by what she was seeing. Sarah was demonstrating physical abilities that suggested years of intensive training in balance and coordination. Her core strength was exceptional, and her body awareness was at a level that Jenny usually only saw in professional dancers or athletes. When Jenny asked Sarah where she had learned to move with such control, Sarah looked genuinely puzzled. She said the movements felt completely natural to her, but she could not remember ever doing exercises like these before. Her body seemed to know exactly what to do, even though her mind had no memory of learning these skills. The strangest thing happened during Sarah's second physical therapy session. Jenny was testing Sarah's reaction time by having her catch a ball that was dropped from different heights. This was a standard test to check if patients had any coordination problems after head injuries. But Sarah's reactions were incredibly fast and precise. She caught the ball every single time, no matter how quickly Jenny dropped it or from which direction. Her hands moved to the right position before the ball even reached her, as if she could predict exactly where it would be. Jenny had never seen reaction times that fast in any patient she had worked with. Sarah was responding to the falling ball faster than most professional athletes could. When Jenny asked how she was able to catch the ball so easily, Sarah just shrugged and said it felt automatic. During the third day of physical therapy, something happened that made Jenny realize Sarah had training that went far beyond normal fitness. Jenny accidentally dropped a clipboard behind Sarah while she was doing exercises. The sound was not very loud, but Sarah's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Sarah spun around instantly and dropped into a defensive crouch, with her hands positioned like she was ready for combat. Her eyes scanned the entire room looking for threats, and her whole body was tense and ready for action. It took several seconds for Sarah to realize it was just an accidental noise and relax again. Jenny had seen reactions like this before, but only in patients who were military veterans with combat experience. The instant alertness and defensive positioning were responses that came from training in dangerous situations where quick reactions could save lives. When Jenny asked Sarah about her reaction, Sarah seemed embarrassed and confused. She said she did not know why she had responded that way, but that loud, unexpected sounds made her feel like she needed to be ready for trouble. She could not explain where these instincts came from. That same afternoon, Sarah was walking in the hospital corridors for her daily exercise when she heard the overhead announcement for a code blue emergency. A code blue meant someone's heart had stopped and needed immediate life-saving treatment. Most patients would have stayed away from such a serious medical situation, but Sarah found herself walking quickly toward the emergency. She followed the sound of running footsteps and urgent voices until she reached room 318, where an elderly patient was in cardiac arrest. Sarah stood in the doorway watching the medical team work to save the man's life. The medical team was working frantically to restart the patient's heart. Dr. Walsh was preparing the defibrillator while nurses administered medications and checked vital signs. Everyone was focused on saving the patient's life, but Sarah could see that something was not right with their approach. From her position in the doorway, Sarah watched the heart monitor and noticed something the medical team had missed. The patient's heart rhythm looked unusual, in a way that suggested the problem was not a Natural heart attack, but something caused by medication. They should check his medication list for interactions, Sarah said quietly, but her voice carried to Marcus Thompson, who was responding to the emergency. That rhythm pattern looks like it could be drug-induced rather than a natural cardiac event. Marcus turned to look at Sarah with surprise. Her assessment was completely accurate and showed medical knowledge that most nurses needed years of experience to develop. The ability to read heart rhythms and identify drug-induced problems was an advanced skill that required extensive training. The medical team followed Sarah's suggestion and discovered she was exactly right. The patient had been given a new heart medication that morning, which had reacted dangerously with his existing prescriptions. Once they identified the drug interaction and adjusted his treatment, the patient's condition improved rapidly. After the emergency was over, Marcus came to find Sarah in her room. He sat down beside her bed with a serious expression on his face. "Sarah, I need to ask you some direct questions about your background," he said. "I want you to think very carefully before you answer." "Have you ever served in the military in any capacity?" Marcus asked. "Any branch of service, even if it was just basic training or part-time reserve duty. Sometimes people forget important details about their past, especially after experiencing traumatic accidents like yours." Sarah was quiet for a long time while she searched through her memories. She seemed to be trying to find something that felt familiar, but remained just out of her reach. Her forehead wrinkled with concentration as she thought about Marcus's question. "I honestly do not remember," Sarah finally answered, but her voice showed uncertainty rather than confidence. "But lately I have been having these strange experiences that feel like memories but do not make complete sense to me. They come when I am trying to sleep or when the hospital is very quiet." Sarah began describing fragments of experiences that came to her in dreams and quiet moments. She talked about hearing the sound of helicopters flying low overhead. She remembered the feeling of carrying heavy medical equipment that seemed important, but she could not identify what it was. "Sometimes I wake up and find that my hands are positioned like I am holding something," Sarah continued, "but I never know what I'm supposed to be holding. And I keep feeling like I need to watch the doors and windows, even though I know I am safe here in the hospital." Sarah also mentioned that certain sounds made her feel alert and ready for action even when there was no real danger. The beeping of medical monitors reminded her of something important, but she could not remember what. When she heard people running in the hallway, she felt an urge to follow them and help with whatever emergency was happening. Marcus listened carefully to everything Sarah told him. He had seen cases like this before among soldiers who had experienced severe head trauma or psychological shock. The conscious mind could lose access to specific memories while the body retained all of its training and automatic responses. Sarah's medical knowledge was still there, buried, somewhere in her mind where she could not consciously access it. Her body remembered how to move and react in emergency situations. Her instincts recognized medical equipment and knew how to respond to cardiac emergencies. But she could not remember where or how she had learned these advanced skills. The next morning, Marcus came to Sarah's room with a friendly smile, but his mind was focused on the test he had planned. He wanted to see if placing Sarah in a medical emergency environment would trigger her buried memories and reveal the extent of her hidden training. "Sarah, I would like to show you something interesting," Marcus said as he helped her into a wheelchair for the trip downstairs. "The hospital has a special training room where we practice emergency procedures. I thought you might find it educational since you seem so interested in medical procedures." Sarah agreed to go with him, curious about what kind of training the hospital staff did. She had been feeling restless in her room and welcomed the chance to see more of the hospital. As Marcus wheeled her through the corridors, she noticed they were going to a part of the building she had not seen before. The medical simulation room was located in the basement level of Regional Medical Center. It was designed to look exactly like a real emergency room with hospital beds, medical equipment, and all the supplies needed to treat serious injuries. The room was used to train doctors and nurses for situations they might face during actual emergencies. As they entered the simulation room, Sarah felt something strange happen to her mind and body. The sight of the medical equipment and the smell of disinfectant seemed to awaken something deep inside her memory. Her posture straightened automatically, and her eyes began scanning the room with professional interest. "This is very realistic," Sarah said as she looked around the training room. But Marcus noticed that her voice had changed. She was no longer speaking like a confused patient, but with the confidence of someone who belonged in a medical environment. Her entire demeanor had shifted in a way that was impossible to miss. Marcus helped Sarah out of the wheelchair and watched as she began moving around the room. Without being asked, she walked directly to a supply cabinet and began examining the medical equipment inside. Her hands seemed to know exactly what each item was for, even though she claimed to have no medical training. Sarah picked up a trauma kit and began organizing the supplies inside with practiced efficiency. She arranged bandages, surgical instruments, and medications in a specific order that made perfect sense for emergency treatment. Her movements were quick and confident, like someone who had done this countless times before. "Marcus, I do not understand what is happening to me," Sarah said, but her hands continued working automatically. "Everything in this room feels so familiar, but I cannot remember why. It is like my body knows what to do, even though my mind does not understand." Marcus decided to test her abilities more directly. He brought out a medical training mannequin that was designed to simulate a patient with multiple serious injuries. The mannequin had artificial wounds that could bleed and sensors that tracked whether medical procedures were being performed correctly. "This patient has been injured in an explosion," Marcus said, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. "He has multiple wounds and is losing blood pressure rapidly. What would you do to help him?" Marcus expected Sarah to be confused or overwhelmed by such a complex medical scenario. Instead, Sarah moved toward the mannequin with immediate purpose. Her hesitation and confusion disappeared completely as she began assessing the artificial injuries. She worked with absolute certainty, checking for life-threatening problems and prioritizing treatment based on which injuries were most dangerous. "Control the bleeding, first establish. Airway check for tension, pneumothorax," Sarah said as her hands moved efficiently over the mannequin. Her voice had taken on a command tone that Marcus had never heard from her before. She was no longer acting like a confused patient, but like an experienced medical professional. "This wound pattern suggests fragmentation injury, possibly from an IED. Blast." Sarah continued using military terminology that civilian medical workers rarely knew. "Need to check for secondary injuries from the blast. Wave and prepare for immediate evacuation to surgical facilities." Marcus watched in amazement as Sarah demonstrated medical skills that were far beyond what most civilian doctors possessed. She was using techniques and terminology that came specifically from combat medicine training. Every procedure she performed was textbook perfect, but more than that, it carried the confidence of someone who had saved lives in real combat situations. Sarah worked on the training mannequin for almost 20 minutes, demonstrating advanced trauma care that would have impressed military medical instructors. She treated multiple wounds simultaneously while maintaining constant awareness of the patient's overall condition and vital signs. When she finished, Sarah stepped back and looked at the mannequin with satisfaction. The computer system that monitored the training exercise showed that she had performed every procedure perfectly and in exactly the right order to save the patient's life. "I know I just did that correctly," Sarah said quietly, but there was confusion mixed with pride in her voice. "I have no idea how I know what I know, but every movement felt completely natural to me. It was like my hands remembered even though my mind does not." Marcus was now completely convinced that Sarah had extensive military medical training, probably in special operations. Her skills were not just those of a regular combat medic, but showed the advanced training given to medical personnel who worked with elite military units in the most dangerous situations. "Sarah, you have training that goes far beyond basic medical care," Marcus said gently. "What you just demonstrated requires years of specialized education and experience in combat medicine. This is not something you could learn from books or civilian medical programs. The techniques you used and the way you prioritize treatment show that you have worked as a combat medic in real emergency situations. Your muscle memory and instincts are those of someone who has saved lives under enemy fire in combat zones." Sarah listened to Marcus with growing recognition on her face. As he described combat medicine training, fragments of memories began surfacing in her mind. She could almost see herself treating wounded soldiers in dusty, dangerous places where explosions and gunfire were constant threats. "I think you are right," Sarah said slowly. "I can feel memories trying to come back, but they are still too fuzzy to understand completely. But being in this room, working with medical equipment, feels more natural to me than anything else I have done since my accident." Marcus realized that Sarah's car accident had somehow triggered her buried medical skills to resurface. The trauma had created a situation similar enough to her combat experience that her deeply trained responses had overcome whatever was blocking her memories. He decided it was time to do some research into Sarah's real background to discover the truth about her military service and what had caused her to lose her memories in the first place. That evening, Marcus returned to his apartment with Sarah's demonstration still fresh in his mind. He had seen enough to know that Sarah possessed advanced military medical training, but he needed to find out exactly who she was and what had happened to cause her memory loss. Marcus had contacts in the military who could help him access personnel records. Marcus opened his laptop and began making secure phone calls to friends who worked in military, intelligence, and personnel departments. He explained that he was trying to help a veteran who seemed to have lost her memory and needed to verify her service record. His contacts agreed to run a discreet search using Sarah's name and physical description. The first search through regular military databases came back with no results for Sarah Martinez. But Marcus knew that special operations personnel often had their records classified or filed under different systems for security reasons. He asked his contacts to search deeper into classified databases that contained information about elite military units. 2 hours later, Marcus received a secure phone call that changed everything he thought he knew about Sarah. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel James Rodriguez, who worked in Special Operations personnel records. Marcus, I found your Sarah Martinez, but her file is heavily classified, the colonel said. According to the records, Sarah Martinez was not just a regular combat medic, but was part of an elite Special Operations medical team. She had been specially selected and trained to provide medical support for the most dangerous missions that Special Forces units conducted in combat zones around the world. Her training record showed expertise in battlefield, trauma surgery, advanced life support under combat conditions, and emergency medical procedures that were taught only to the most skilled military medical personnel. Sarah had completed multiple deployments to active combat zones where she had served with distinction, saving countless lives under extremely dangerous conditions. The colonel continued reading from Sarah's classified file. She was involved in a mission that went catastrophically wrong about 18 months ago. Her unit was providing medical support during a high-risk operation to rescue hostages when they came under heavy enemy attack from multiple directions. According to the mission report, Sarah had continued treating wounded soldiers even as their position was being overrun by enemy forces. She had refused to abandon her patients despite direct orders to evacuate when the situation became hopeless. Sarah had kept working to save lives until an explosion from an enemy rocket had knocked her unconscious. The blast had caused severe traumatic brain injury that left Sarah in a coma for 3 weeks. When she finally woke up, she had lost most of her memory, including all recollection of her military service, her medical training, and the traumatic mission that had nearly killed her. Colonel Rodriguez explained that Sarah had been medically discharged from the military and enrolled in a special rehabilitation program designed to help veterans with severe PTSD and memory loss. The program was designed to give soldiers new identities and peaceful civilian lives when their psychological injuries were too severe for them to return to military service. The coffee shop job, her apartment, and even her civilian identification documents had all been part of a carefully constructed new life, meant to help Sarah recover from her trauma. The program was designed to let veterans start over completely without the burden of memories that might prevent them from healing. Marcus listened to this information with growing understanding of what Sarah had been through. Her memory loss was not just from the head injury, but was also a psychological protection mechanism that her mind had created to shield her from traumatic memories that were too painful to remember. The colonel warned Marcus that Sarah's case was extremely sensitive because of the classified nature of her military service. Any attempt to force her to remember her past could potentially cause severe psychological damage or complete mental breakdown if she was not ready to handle those memories. Marcus thanked the colonel for the information and promised to handle Sarah's case with extreme care. He now understood that Sarah's car accident had somehow triggered her buried medical training to resurface. The trauma of the crash had created a situation similar enough to her combat experience that her deeply ingrained skills had overcome the psychological blocks. The next morning, Marcus went to the hospital early to speak with Dr. Walsh about Sarah's situation. He explained what he had learned about Sarah's military background and the circumstances that had caused her memory loss. Dr. Walsh listened with amazement as Marcus described Sarah's elite special operations medical training. "This explains everything we have observed about her behavior," Dr. Walsh said. "Her medical knowledge, her calm demeanor under pressure, and her automatic responses to emergency situations all make sense now. She was one of the most highly trained military medics in the entire armed forces." Marcus and Dr. Walsh agreed that they needed to approach Sarah very carefully about her past. They could not simply tell her everything at once, because the shock of learning about her traumatic military experiences might cause serious psychological harm. Instead, they would need to let her memories return gradually and naturally. They decided that Marcus should be the one to talk with Sarah, since his own military background would help him understand what she had been through. Dr. Walsh would arrange for a military psychologist to be available in case Sarah needed professional help dealing with returning memories. That afternoon, Marcus sat down with Sarah in her hospital room. He had spent hours thinking about how to begin this difficult conversation. Sarah had been through terrible trauma and deserved to know the truth about herself, but the revelation needed to be handled with great care. "Sarah, I have learned some important information about your background that I need to share with you," Marcus said gently. "What I am going to tell you might be difficult to hear, but it will help you understand why you have the medical knowledge and skills that have been surprising everyone." Sarah looked at Marcus with curiosity mixed with apprehension. She had been wondering about her mysterious abilities and was ready to learn the truth even if it might be painful. She sat up straighter in her hospital bed and prepared herself to finally discover who she really was. "You served in the military as a special operations combat medic," Marcus began carefully. "You were not just a regular medic, but were part of an elite team that provided medical support for the most dangerous missions our military conducted." Marcus spent the next hour carefully explaining Sarah's military service and the circumstances that had led to her memory loss. He told her about her elite special operations medical training and the dangerous mission where she had been injured while trying to save her fellow soldiers. Sarah listened with growing recognition as pieces of her forgotten life began falling into place. As Marcus described her combat medical service, Sarah felt fragments of memories starting to surface in her mind. She could see flashes of herself treating wounded soldiers in dusty, dangerous places, where explosions echoed in the distance. The images were still unclear, but they felt real and familiar in a way that her civilian life never had. "I was a medic," Sarah said slowly, as the words felt both strange and natural on her tongue. "I saved people's lives in combat zones. That is why I knew what to do in the emergency room and why everything about medical work feels so familiar to me. I am not losing my mind after all." Tears began streaming down Sarah's face, but they were tears of relief rather than sadness. For the first time since her car accident, she finally understood who she really was and why she had been feeling so lost and confused in her civilian life. The medical skills that had been puzzling everyone were not mysterious at all, but were the result of years of intensive training and real combat experience. Marcus continued explaining that her memory loss had been both physical, from the brain injury, and psychological protection from traumatic experiences that had been too painful for her mind to handle. Her car accident had somehow triggered her medical training to resurface because the emergency situation had been similar enough to her combat experiences. The weeks that followed were challenging as Sarah worked with military psychologists and therapists to help integrate her recovered memories with her current life. Dr. Patricia Williams was a specialist who worked with veterans suffering from trauma-related memory loss. She helped Sarah understand that her memories would return gradually and that she should not try to force them back all at once. Some memories returned in vivid detail, while others remained frustratingly out of reach. Sarah could remember specific medical procedures she had performed and the faces of some soldiers she had saved, but she still could not recall many personal details about her military service. Dr. Williams explained that this was normal and that her mind would reveal memories only when she was ready to handle them. The most important thing that had returned was Sarah's sense of purpose and identity. She finally understood why her job at the coffee shop had felt so meaningless and why she had been feeling restless and unfulfilled in her civilian life. Her true calling was medicine and helping people in their most desperate moments of need. Sarah made the decision to leave her job at the coffee shop and return to medical work. With Marcus's strong recommendation and her rediscovered military medical credentials, she was hired as a trauma nurse at Regional Medical Center. The hospital administration was amazed to learn about her elite military medical background and welcomed her exceptional skills to their team. Sarah's first day back in a medical setting, since her injury was emotional, but everything felt right in a way that nothing else had since her accident. When she put on scrubs and entered the emergency department, it was like coming home after a long journey. Her hands knew exactly what to do, and her mind was clear about her purpose in life. Dr. Walsh was amazed by Sarah's transformation over the following weeks. The quiet, confused patient from a few weeks earlier had been replaced by a confident medical professional who brought invaluable experience to their trauma team. Sarah's combat medical training gave her skills that few civilian healthcare workers possessed, and her calm demeanor under pressure became legendary among the hospital staff. Marcus and Sarah developed a close friendship based on their shared military medical background. He helped her navigate the adjustment back to medical work, while she brought her unique combat experience to their civilian practice. Together, they developed new protocols for treating traumatic injuries and began training other medical personnel in techniques adapted from battlefield medicine. The emergency department at Regional Medical Center became known for having some of the best trauma care in the region. Sarah's expertise in treating multiple simultaneous injuries and her ability to work efficiently under extreme pressure saved many lives that might have been lost with conventional treatment approaches. On quiet nights in the hospital, Sarah sometimes thought about the soldiers she had served with and the lives she had saved in places whose names she still could not fully remember. She knew she would probably never recover all of her memories, but she had recovered the most important parts of herself. She was a medic, a healer, and someone who ran toward danger to help others. The car accident that had nearly killed her had actually given her back her true life. For the first time since her brain injury, she felt complete and whole. Her hands knew their purpose again, her mind was clear about her calling, and she was using her hard-won skills to save lives in a peaceful setting instead of a war zone. 6 months after her accident, Sarah received a letter from the Veterans Administration recognizing her service and offering additional support for her recovery. The letter also contained contact information for some of the soldiers whose lives she had saved during her military service. Many of them had been searching for the medic who had kept them alive during the worst moments of their lives. Sarah decided to reach out to some of these veterans, which helped fill in more pieces of her military memories. Hearing their stories about how she had saved them gave her a deeper understanding of the important work she had done and the difference she had made in their lives. Her story spread through the medical community as an inspiration about the power of muscle memory and the unbreakable connection between training and identity. Sarah had been wounded, and she had been silent about her past, but when the moment came to prove who she really was, her skills and instincts had spoken louder than any words ever could. Sarah Martinez had found her way back to herself and was once again saving lives just as she had always been meant to do.